"Dad, you should cover the baby's nursery." That was how Marcus opened the conversation, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening like he was reminding me about a bill I'd forgotten to pay. Not asking, not suggesting, just laying it down between us like he'd already drawn up the contract and just needed my signature. I was rinsing out my coffee mug at the sink, the one with the chipped handle my late wife Alina had bought me 20 years ago, and I didn't turn around right away. I let the water run a few seconds longer than necessary, watching it swirl down the drain of the stainless steel sink I'd installed myself back in 2009. My name's Raymond Whitfield. I'm 63 years old, retired from running my own electrical contracting business for the past 4 years, and I've lived in this single-story ranch house on Juniper Lane in Tucson, Arizona for 31 years. I built the addition off the back myself the summer Marcus turned 10. I rewired the entire place twice. Every outlet, every switch, every light fixture in this house has my fingerprints on it, figuratively and probably literally too. So when my only son walked into my kitchen and told me what I should pay for, something old and steady inside me clicked into focus the way it used to when I'd spot a wiring problem in a customer's basement. I shut the water off, dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, and finally turned to face him. Marcus stood there in his pressed khakis and that navy polo shirt his wife Brittany always bought him from some online boutique, his arms crossed loosely, his expression carrying the practiced confidence of a man who'd rehearsed this in the car on the way over. He was 34 years old, and somewhere between the boy I'd raised and the man standing in my kitchen, he'd picked up the habit of treating requests like announcements. I smiled. Not a big smile, just the kind you offer when someone tells you something mildly surprising. Then I said, "Why is that my issue?" The question landed flat between us, sitting on the tile floor I'd laid myself one summer when Marcus was in middle school. He blinked twice, and I watched the careful arrangement of his face shift just slightly, the same way it used to when he was 16 and I'd asked him a question he hadn't prepared for. His jaw tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. "Dad, come on," he said, his voice taking on that wounded edge people use when they think they shouldn't have to explain something obvious. "It's your grandchild. The nursery's a big expense." Brittany found this whole setup, the crib, the changing table, the dresser, the rocker, all matching from this designer place in Scottsdale. We're talking about creating a real environment for the baby. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms in a mirror of his stance. The kitchen clock ticked quietly above the doorway, the same clock that had hung there since Alina picked it out at an estate sale in 1998. Through the window above the sink, I could see my workshop in the side yard, the one I'd built from scratch after I retired, and the small vegetable garden where I grew tomatoes and chilies every spring. Everything around me had been earned slowly, with sweat and patience and decisions made carefully over decades. "How much is the whole setup?" I asked, keeping my voice mild, the same tone I used to use when asking a customer to clarify their budget. Marcus hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly toward the floor before meeting mine again. "Around $14,000. The number hung in the air between us like the smell of something burning, impossible to ignore. I didn't react the way he was hoping I would. No widened eyes, no sharp intake of breath, no immediate calculation of whether I could afford it. I just nodded once, slow, the way I used to nod at clients who quoted me wildly unrealistic timelines for their renovation projects. 14,000, I repeated, letting the words sit in my own mouth for a moment. For furniture for a baby who isn't going to remember any of it. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his expensive leather sneakers squeaking slightly against the tile. "It's not just furniture, Dad. It's an investment in the baby's environment. There's research about how early surroundings affect development." He said it the way someone reads a label they didn't write themselves, and I knew immediately he was quoting Brittany. My daughter-in-law had a habit of weaponizing pseudoscientific phrases to justify purchases that had nothing to do with science. I gestured toward the kitchen chair across from me. "Sit down, Marcus." He sat, but slowly, like a man who suspected the chair might collapse beneath him. The chairs were oak, solid as bedrock, built by a furniture maker in Bisbee whose work I'd traded electrical services for back in the 90s. They'd outlasted 3 different dining sets Alina and I had owned. They'd outlast me too. I sat down across from him and folded my hands on the table. The late evening light slanted through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes floating between us, and I noticed for the first time that Marcus looked tired. Not the tired of a man preparing for fatherhood. The tired of a man who'd been holding something heavy for a long time. I filed that observation away the way I used to file away small irregularities on a job site, the kind that meant something bigger was wrong inside the walls. "When's Brittany due?" I asked. "March, around the 15th. And you've already picked out $14,000 worth of nursery furniture." He shifted again, the chair creaking softly beneath him. "Brittany has. She made a registry too, but the big pieces, the crib and the dresser and all that, those don't usually go on registries. People don't buy those for you." "People used to," I said. "Used to be that families would buy one good crib and pass it down. Used to be that a baby slept in a drawer pulled out of a dresser for the first 6 months and turned out just fine. Used to be that a nursery was a corner of a room with a hand-me-down rocking chair and a stack of folded blankets." Marcus's mouth tightened. "Things are different now, Dad." "Are they?" I tilted my head slightly. "Or do they just cost more because someone figured out how to convince young parents that buying expensive things equals being good parents?" He didn't answer that. He looked down at the table, at the knot in the wood near his elbow that I'd polished smooth 100 times over the years. Outside, a mourning dove called from the mesquite tree in the front yard, the same tree Alina and I had planted when we first bought this place. The sound carried through the screen door, soft and familiar. "Why are you asking me to pay for this, Marcus?" I said quietly. "You and Brittany both have jobs, you make decent money. So why come here to my kitchen on a Tuesday evening and tell me what I should cover?" Marcus didn't lift his eyes from the table. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I've been on enough job sites and in enough kitchen table negotiations to know what silence means. There's the silence of someone thinking, and there's the silence of someone calculating. Marcus was calculating. I could see it in the way his thumb rubbed slow circles against his index finger, a habit he'd had since childhood whenever he was trying to figure out which version of the truth would land best. "It's complicated," he finally said. "Try me." He exhaled, long and slow, and ran his hand through his hair the way he used to when he was a teenager facing down a failed math test. "Brittany's been on me about her parents," he said. "About what they're doing for the baby." I waited. "Her dad bought them a new SUV last month, a Lexus. Said it wasn't safe to drive Brittany around in our old Honda once the baby comes. Her mom paid for the whole baby shower setup, rented out the country club in Sedona, did the catering, the flowers, the whole thing. And now they're talking about contributing to a college fund before the baby's even born. They've been, generous." He said the word like it was a weight he couldn't quite lift. "Brittany feels like our side isn't pulling its weight." There it was, the real shape of the thing finally coming into view, the way a load-bearing wall reveals itself once you start tearing out drywall. Not a request for help with a nursery. A demand to keep up appearances in someone else's competition. I sat back in my chair, feeling the wood support my spine the way it had for thousands of meals in this kitchen. "So this isn't really about the nursery. It's about the nursery too." "No, Marcus, it's about Brittany's parents making her feel like her in-laws are second-rate. And instead of telling your wife that her parents' spending habits aren't a measuring stick for our family, you came here to ask me to match their pace." His face flushed slightly, a red creeping up from his collar. "That's not fair, Dad. Her parents have more money than you do, it's just a fact." "It might be a fact," I said evenly. But it's not the relevant one. The relevant fact is whether they've earned the right to use their money to make my son feel like he married up, and whether you're willing to participate in that arrangement. He looked away, toward the window, toward the mesquite tree where the mourning dove was still calling. I watched my son's jaw work, watched him try to find a way to reframe what I just said into something less true. I'd seen that exact expression on his face when he was 14, and I'd caught him in a lie about where he'd been after school. He had been a bad liar then. He wasn't much better now. "They mean well," he said quietly. "I'm sure they do," I said. "People who use money as leverage usually convince themselves that they mean well. That's how the leverage works." The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then went quiet. I noticed Marcus's phone buzzing in his pocket, a soft vibration he ignored, but I saw the way his shoulders tensed at the sound. Brittany, probably, checking in, making sure he was sticking to the script she'd helped him prepare. "Did Brittany send you here tonight?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. His phone buzzed again. 3 short pulses this time, more insistent than before, like whoever was on the other end was getting impatient. Marcus reached for his pocket, then stopped himself, then reached again and pulled the phone out face down on the table. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't have to. We both knew who it was. "She didn't send me," he said, but the words came out thin, the way water sounds when it's running through a pipe with too little pressure. "We talked about it together. That's different." "Together," I repeated. "And whose idea was it to come here tonight with a specific number already attached?" He didn't answer. I let the silence work on him the way I used to let a problem work on me when I couldn't figure out the source of a short circuit. Sometimes you have to stop poking at the wires and just listen to what the house is telling you. Marcus sat across from me, his shoulders gradually rounding forward, and I watched the practiced confidence of his arrival slowly drain out of him until what was left was just my son, looking smaller in his expensive polo shirt than he had 10 minutes ago. "Brittany doesn't think you take this seriously," he said finally. "The baby, becoming a grandfather, she thinks you're, I don't know, detached, that you're not invested." "Invested," I said. "An interesting word choice. I don't mean financially." "Don't you?" He winced. The phone buzzed again, a longer vibration this time. A call now, not a text. Marcus flipped the phone over, glanced at the screen, then silenced it and turned it back face down without answering. The screen had said Brittany in clean white letters above a smiling photo of her in a sun hat. I leaned forward and rested my forearms on the table, the way I used to do when I needed a customer to really hear me. "Marcus, listen to me carefully. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to think about it before you respond. Can you do that?" He nodded once. "I held you the day you were born. I taught you how to ride a bike on the cul-de-sac behind this house. I sat up with you the night your mother died, and you didn't sleep for 3 days, and neither did I. I paid for half your college, costed your first apartment lease, and I drove 400 miles to fix the wiring in your first rental house because the landlord was a crook, and I didn't want you living somewhere that might catch fire. I have been invested in you, Marcus, every single day for 34 years. So when your wife tells you that I'm not invested because I haven't bought a $14,000 nursery, what she's really telling you is that she doesn't understand what investment means." The kitchen went very quiet. Even the mourning dove had gone silent. Marcus's eyes were shining just slightly, and he looked down at the table fast enough that I could pretend not to notice. "I know, Dad," he said, his voice rough. "I know all that. Do you?" "I do." "Then why are you sitting at my kitchen table letting me find out that my son's marriage runs on a scoreboard?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. And the silence that followed wasn't calculating anymore. It was something else, something rower, the silence of a man who just heard a truth he'd been working very hard to avoid. Then the doorbell rang. Marcus's head snapped up like he'd been shocked. He looked at me, then at his silenced phone, then toward the front of the house, and I watched the color drain out of his face. He hadn't told her he was coming here. Or he had, but he hadn't told her he'd be staying this long. Either way, she decided to find out for herself. I stood up slowly, my knees giving their usual quiet protest, and walked through the living room toward the front door. The doorbell rang again before I got there, and then a third time, 3 sharp jabs in quick succession. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door to find Brittany Whitfield standing on my front porch in white linen pants and a pale pink maternity blouse, her purse hooked over her forearm, her expression composed in the way a person composes themselves before walking into a meeting they expect to win. "Raymond," she said brightly, the smile arriving a half-second after the word. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Marcus has been ignoring his phone and I got worried." "He's in the kitchen," I said, stepping back to let her in. "Come on through." She moved through my living room with the casual proprietorship of someone who'd already mentally redecorated the space. Her eyes flicked over Alina's china cabinet, the framed photographs on the mantel, the leather recliner where I read every evening. I'd seen that look before, on real estate agents touring homes they were planning to flip. She didn't look at things. She appraised them. When we got to the kitchen, Marcus stood up from the table too quickly, the chair scraping loudly against the tile. "Hey, babe, I was just about to head home." "Were you?" Brittany said sweetly, leaning up to kiss his cheek while her eyes stayed on me. "Because you've been here almost 2 hours and I thought maybe you needed backup." I gestured toward the chair beside Marcus. "Please, sit down. I was just making your husband answer some questions." The smile on her face flickered, just for a moment like a fluorescent bulb deciding whether to hold a charge. Then it returned, brighter than before. She lowered herself carefully into the chair, one hand resting on the small curve of her belly, the other smoothing her blouse. 6 months along by my count. Maybe 7. The kind of pregnancy that hadn't yet become uncomfortable enough to slow her down. "What questions?" she asked, her voice still light, still pleasant. "About $14,000 worth of nursery furniture," I said, sitting down across from them. "And about why Marcus drove 40 minutes across town tonight to tell me I should pay for it." Brittany's hand stilled on her blouse. The fluorescent flicker came back, longer this time. Then she rearranged her face into something warmer, more conspiratorial, the expression of a woman about to let me in on a confidence. "Raymond, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't expecting you to pay for the whole thing. We were just hoping you might want to contribute, as a way of being involved. My parents have been so excited about the baby, and we just thought." "That's the second time tonight someone has told me what your parents are doing," I said. "I want to be clear about something, Brittany. I don't care what your parents are doing. They can spend whatever they want. That has nothing to do with me, and it has nothing to do with what kind of grandfather I'm going to be." Her smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. Brittany shifted in her chair, one manicured hand returning to rest on her belly, the other folding neatly in her lap. I watched her recalibrate in real time, the way I used to watch contractors adjust their bids when they realized the homeowner actually knew something about construction. She wasn't going to win the conversation by talking about her parents anymore, so she pivoted. "Raymond," she said, her voice softer now, dropping into a register that suggested vulnerability, "I think you're misreading the situation. I know how it sounded, but Marcus and I are just trying to do right by this baby. We want to give her the best start we can, and honestly, we've been struggling more than we've let on." There it was, the shift. "Watch for the pivot," my old foreman Eddie used to say. When someone's first story doesn't sell, the second one always tells you more than they meant to. "Struggling how?" I asked. She glanced at Marcus, and I caught the look that passed between them. Not a request for permission. A check. She was making sure he wouldn't contradict whatever she was about to say. Marcus didn't meet her eyes. He stared at the knot in the table, the same knot he'd been staring at for the last hour, as if it might offer him some kind of escape route. "The cost of everything," Brittany said. "Rent went up almost $300 when we renewed our lease in August. Groceries, insurance, my prenatal care, Even with the good insurance, there are still copays for everything. We've been putting things on credit cards just to get by, and now with the baby coming, the medical bills are going to start stacking up, and we're scared, Raymond. We're really scared. It was a good performance. The vulnerability was calibrated perfectly, the slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes welled just enough to suggest sincerity without spilling over. If I hadn't watched her walk into my living room like she was already counting the square footage, I might have believed her. "How much debt?" I asked. She blinked. "What? How much credit card debt, roughly?" The question caught her off balance, and I watched her hesitate. Whatever script she'd prepared hadn't included specifics. Specifics are dangerous. Specifics can be checked. "I don't know exactly," she said carefully. "We don't really track it that closely. Maybe, I don't know, 10,000. Marcus made a small sound, almost a cough, and Brittany shot him a look so fast I almost missed it. I didn't miss it. Neither did Marcus, who immediately busied himself with the cuff of his sleeve. "Marcus," I said without taking my eyes off Brittany, "how much credit card debt do you and your wife have?" He didn't answer. "Son, look at me." He looked up. His eyes were red around the edges now, the way they got when he was overtired or when he was about to break. "How much?" "Closer to 30, he said quietly. "Maybe 32. Brittany inhaled sharply through her nose but said nothing. The composed mask was holding just barely, but the edges were starting to fray. $32,000 in credit card debt, I repeated. And the plan to fix that is to add $14,000 of designer nursery furniture on top of it. It's not about fixing the debt, Brittany said, recovering quickly. It's about not letting the debt steal joy from this moment. This baby deserves. Don't, I said, just the one word. And to her credit, she stopped. The kitchen was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming. Brittany's hand had moved off her belly and was now gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles pale beneath her French manicure. Marcus was looking at his wife the way a man looks at a dog he suspects might bite. The room had changed temperature, even though the thermostat hadn't moved. "I'm going to tell you both something," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I'm going to tell you exactly once because I don't repeat myself and I'm too old to argue. So listen carefully." Neither of them spoke. "You have a baby coming in 3 months. That baby is going to need diapers, formula or breastfeeding supplies, a safe place to sleep, clean clothes, and 2 parents who aren't drowning in panic about money. That's it. That's the entire list of what that baby actually needs. Everything else, the matching furniture, the designer everything, the country club shower, the new SUV, the nursery that looks like a magazine photo, none of that is for the baby. The baby doesn't know it exists. The baby will not remember it. The baby will not be measurably better off because of any of it." Brittany opened her mouth. I held up one hand. "I'm not finished." She closed her mouth. "All of that," I continued, "is for the adults in the baby's life. It's for the people who want to be seen as a certain kind of parent. It's for the social media photos and the comparison games with your friends and the validation that comes from looking like you've got it together. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel good about yourself. There is something wrong with going $32,000 into debt to do it, and then asking your in-laws to write a check so the performance can continue." Brittany's eyes were no longer welling. They were narrowed. The vulnerability act had been quietly retired, and what was left was something harder, the look of a woman who just realized her best card hadn't worked. "You don't understand what it's like for our generation," she said, and her voice had a thin, sharp edge now, like a piece of metal that had been bent too many times. "Things are different. The cost of living, the expectations, social media, it's all different than when you raised Marcus. You can't just compare." "I'm not comparing," I said. "I'm watching. I'm watching 2 people who make decent money tell me they're drowning, and then watch one of them try to convince me to bail out their lifestyle while pretending it's about a baby. I raised Marcus on a single income after his mother died, working 12-hour days on job sites where I came home with my hands bleeding. So when you tell me I don't understand financial pressure, What I'm hearing is that you've never actually experienced it." The words landed harder than I'd intended. Brittany's face went very still. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, the way a man does when he's been hit but doesn't want to show it. Outside, the desert was sliding into full dark and the kitchen lights felt suddenly too bright, exposing all of us in ways I think none of us wanted. Brittany pushed her chair back and stood up, slowly, one hand braced on the table. "Marcus," she said, "we're leaving." Marcus didn't move right away. He sat there looking at the knot in the wood, and I watched my son try to decide which voice to obey. His wife's or whatever was left of his own. Marcus stood up. He moved slowly, like a man whose legs had fallen asleep, and he didn't look at me as he rose. Brittany was already at the kitchen doorway, her purse back on her forearm, her posture rearranged into the offended dignity of a guest who'd been wronged. I stayed in my chair. There was nothing left to say standing up that I hadn't already said sitting down. At the doorway, Marcus paused. He turned back just for a moment and our eyes met across the kitchen. He looked like he wanted to say something, an apology maybe, or an explanation, or just goodbye. But Brittany said, "Marcus," in that clipped tone that brooked no delay, and he turned and followed her out. The front door closed harder than it needed to. I heard the SUV start in my driveway, the one her father had bought them, and the headlights swept across my living room window as they backed out. Then they were gone, and the house settled back into its usual quiet, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving, listening to the refrigerator hum and the desert wind move through the mesquite tree outside. I didn't call. I wasn't going to. If Marcus needed to find his way back to this kitchen, he'd have to find it on his own. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The Sunday phone calls Marcus had made nearly every week of his adult life stopped. No texts, no emails, no requests to come by for dinner. I went about my routine, watered my garden, fixed a loose hinge on the back gate, drove out to the desert one morning to watch the sunrise over the Catalinas the way Alina and I used to do. The absence of my son was a presence in itself, a weight that sat in the corner of every room, but I didn't pick up the phone. In the 4th week, my sister Linda called from Tempe. Linda is 2 years younger than me and has always been the family switchboard, the one who knows everyone's business whether they want her to or not. She doesn't usually call unless something is up. "Raymond," she said, "I just got off the phone with Brittany." I sat down on the arm of the recliner. "Did you now?" She called me crying. Said you'd been cruel to her, that you'd humiliated her in your kitchen, that she's worried Marcus is depressed because his father has, and I'm quoting here, "refused to be part of the baby's life." I closed my eyes briefly. "Did she ask you for anything?" A pause. "She mentioned the nursery." "Of course she did. She wanted to know if I might want to help with a contribution. Said it would mean a lot, especially since the baby's grandfather had made it clear he wasn't interested." I let out a slow breath. The phoenix sky outside my window was that particular shade of blue it gets in late afternoon, washed out and endless. "Linda, listen to me. I'm going to tell you what actually happened and then you can decide what you want to do," I told her. The $14,000 nursery, the $32,000 in credit card debt, the in-laws Lexus, the country club shower, the carefully calibrated vulnerability. Linda listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Raymond," she finally said, "there's something else you should probably know." My stomach tightened slightly. "What?" "It's about the debt." "Brittany's been asking around the family," Linda said carefully. "Not just me. She called Aunt Carol last month. She called Alina's brother Tom in San Diego. She's been asking everyone for contributions, framing it different ways depending on who she's talking to. With Carol, it was about being included in the baby's life. With Tom, it was about Alina's memory and wanting the baby to have something connected to her grandmother. I closed my eyes. The Phoenix afternoon was utterly silent around me, but inside my chest, something old and tired was settling into place. Did anyone send money? Tom sent $2,000. Carol sent $500. I think a few others sent smaller amounts. Raymond, the thing is, no one knew anyone else was being asked. She made each of us think we were the only one she'd reached out to. It was Carol who finally mentioned it to me at the family group text last week, and once we started comparing notes, it added up to somewhere north of $4,000 in the last 2 months. From relatives, not for diapers or formula, for a nursery. I sat in my recliner and let the information sink in. The pattern wasn't a series of separate moments anymore. It was a structure. A whole architecture of small, polished requests, each one designed to look like a one-time favor, each one quietly stacked on top of the others. Brittany hadn't just come to my kitchen with a $14,000 ask. She'd been working the whole family for months, and Marcus had either known and gone along with it or hadn't known at all. I wasn't sure which possibility bothered me more. Linda, does Marcus know? I don't think so. Tom and Carol said she specifically asked them not to mention it to him, said he was sensitive about money and it would embarrass him. She made it sound like she was protecting his pride. After we hung up, I sat in that recliner for almost an hour, watching the late afternoon light move across my living room floor. Then I picked up the phone and called my son. He answered on the third ring. His voice sounded tired. "Dad, Marcus, I need you to come over, tonight if you can, alone." He didn't ask why. There was a long pause and then he said, "I'll be there in an hour." He arrived just after 7, the desert sky going purple behind him as he stepped onto my front porch. He looked thinner than he had a month ago, the skin under his eyes a shade darker, his shoulders carrying a weight he hadn't been carrying before. I let him in without speaking, walked him into the kitchen, sat him down at the same table where this had all started, and put a glass of water in front of him. Then I told him what Linda had told me. He listened without moving. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend, didn't reach for his phone. He just sat there with both hands wrapped around the water glass and listened. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a coyote called once, distant and thin. "I didn't know," he said finally, and his voice cracked on the second word. "Dad, I swear to God, I didn't know about Carol or Tom. I didn't know about any of it." "I believe you," I said, and I did. He put his head in his hands. He sat with his head in his hands for a long while, and I didn't rush him. I just got up, refilled his water glass, and sat back down. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red but dry, the way a man's eyes look when he stopped fighting something. "I knew about some of it," he said quietly. "Not Carol and Tom. The family. But the credit cards, the spending, the pressure to keep up with her parents, all of that I knew. And I let it happen because every time I tried to push back, she'd cry, or she'd say I was making her feel like she wasn't supported, or she'd remind me how much her parents had given us. And I kept thinking if I just held on until the baby came, things would settle down. She'd snap out of it. We'd figure it out." "Marcus," I said, "you can't outweight a habit. You have to break it." He nodded slowly. He stayed for another hour that night and we talked, really talked, the way we hadn't talked since he was 16 and his mother was dying and there was no one else in the world but the two of us. He drove home after midnight. What happened over the next 6 months wasn't simple. Brittany didn't take the conversation well, and the marriage went through a stretch where I genuinely thought it wouldn't survive. They went to counseling. They sold the SUV her father had bought them, paid back what they could, and bought a used Toyota with cash. They moved into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment closer to Marcus's work. The $14,000 nursery never happened. Marcus built a crib himself in my workshop on weekends. I taught him how to mortise the joints, how to sand with the grain, how to finish wood so it would last for grandchildren of his own someday. It wasn't pretty. It was beautiful. My granddaughter was born on a Tuesday in March. They named her Alina, after the woman she'd never meet but whose hands had shaped half the things in my house. I held her in the hospital that afternoon, this tiny scrap of a person sleeping against my chest, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the day her grandmother died. Brittany and I are cordial now. Not close. We probably never will be. But she stopped asking the family for money, and she stopped framing every expense as a moral test, and she has, slowly, learned to let her parents' spending stay her parents' business. Marcus says she's different now. I'll take his word for it. Sometimes I sit in my kitchen in the evenings and I think about that Tuesday when he walked in and told me I should cover the nursery. I think about how easy it would have been to say yes, to write a check, to keep the peace, to be the generous grandfather who made everything smooth. And I think about what we would have lost if I had. Marcus wouldn't have found the bottom of the hole he was in. He wouldn't have learned to build a crib. He wouldn't have learned to push back against the woman he loved when she was steering them toward ruin. And little Alina would have come into a family where the math never had to add up, because Grandpa would always be there to balance the books. A grandfather's job isn't to bankroll his children's mistakes. It's to be standing on solid ground when they finally decide to climb up to meet him. That's the end of the story. Would you like me to write a title variation, description, or another story in the same style?